And my coaching job is different than most because I work with about 15 different public and private schools supporting teachers in improving their math instruction. I also host parent events at most of these schools each year. So I'm really excited to talk with you today about 5 essential elements for connecting parents to your math classroom. My personal children are both in college now, and throughout their whole K-12 experience, I was only invited to school for one math event, and this was when they were in high school. After 4th grade, neither kid brought home any math work. And the math coach in me was so curious as to what they were actually doing in class. I would ask my kids lots of questions and get some information, but it never quite satisfied my curiosity. I needed that adult lens from the teacher to really understand what was going on. So it really got me thinking about how much the teachers I was working with were sharing with parents. And we were doing a good job inside the classroom, but what were we communicating to parents? So this talk was inspired by those wonderings. As a teacher and a parent, I've seen the difference a connection between the classroom and a child's home can make in a child's experience and in a whole class's experience. These 5 elements will make a difference for you and your students too. So I see a couple people are already jumping on my idea. I'd like to start off with a poll. I'm going to launch this poll here. Here we go. I hope everyone can see this. So just a moment for you to share which things you have done in your classroom. Have you done a parent math education event, such as a talk about the progression of math at your school? Have you engaged parents in math activities? Here come the answers. Awesome. Have you maybe sent home a newsletter or some updates about math class? Have you shared some work that students have done with the parent community? Or maybe you've shared an article or a newsletter or a website about math that you found interesting. Let us know what you've already done so far this school year. All right, just a couple more seconds if you haven't had a chance to respond. There we go. All right, I'm going to end the poll here. And hopefully you can see these results. So it looks like 76% of us have sent home a newsletter or some updates about math class. I see that also a large percentage of people have also shared work that students have done with the parent community. And not as many people have done a parent math education night, 24%, so still a fairly big amount, but not quite as many have done that. So what I hope you will get today is some more ideas so you can continue to broaden your reach and think about if you're already doing 1 or 2 of these, what else you could add to your repertoire to connect parents to your classroom. All right. Turn off our poll. All right, so our goals for today are to understand the importance of connecting parents to your classroom. I'd like to explore 5 simple ways that you can connect with parents and gather resources for creating that connection. I think math class is the class that has changed the most since the parents of your students were in school. I found that most parents are either lacking information about what's going on in class or fearful about what is going on because it looks so different from what they experienced. Let's take a look at this timeline of changes in math education. Which of these do you think the parents of your students are familiar with from their school experiences, and which ones are brand new to them? Let us know in the chat. All right, so Samantha's thinking that the parents in her class are familiar with the base 10, perhaps from school. And Beth says probably the pattern blocks. The base 10 blocks and the pattern blocks were invented in the 60s, so we would hope most of the parents have used them, but you're right, I've still found a lot of parents who haven't. And then algebra tiles, Kath has seen some parents familiar with, and then 10 frames too. Yeah. Well, isn't it surprising that so many of these things have come out just in the last few years and parents aren't familiar with them? So it's no wonder that parents are a little confused about exactly what we're doing in class, and they have a lot of questions. So let's keep talking about it. So I want to talk about the value of including parents in your math journey and teaching them about how and why math class has changed. If we include parents in our journey, it will result in better outcomes for students, an increase in student engagement, an increase in school reputation, and an increase in parent support for the class. These all sound like great things, don't they? You know, I have a lot of teachers comment to me that students have learned this particular strategy at home or that particular strategy, but that isn't the strategy they're working on in class. And I truly believe that parents are just trying to support their students in the best way they can. So if we can channel that energy a bit by teaching them more about what we're doing in class, I think we'll have stronger alignment between what is happening at home and what is happening at school. In fact, recent research has supported these ideas. So Sheldon and Epstein found that effective implementation of practices that encourage families to support their children's mathematical learning at home was associated with higher percentages of students who scored at or above proficiency on standardized math achievement tests. So perhaps if you've been working hard to increase student achievement, this might be one overlooked piece of the puzzle. In addition, Kerman noted that international bodies such as the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development and UNICEF characterize the involvement of parents in education as a fundamental right and obligation. A fundamental right and obligation. So how can we make it easy for parents to get involved? I like these 5 elements and find them useful for including parents in the class's math journey. The first is to educate. The second is to give experiences. The third is to send work home. The fourth is to celebrate. And the fifth is to share good news. I'm going to dig into each one of these. So we all know that working with students is our highest priority. But I believe we also have smaller roles of educating parents and administrators about what we are doing. We talked a little bit about how math class looks so different for parents. So if we can help them understand what we're doing in class, they can better support their children at home. And I have to admit, while I did connect with parents, I was one of those teachers who didn't invite administrators into my classroom at all. I really just didn't see why that was important. But I had a colleague who kept saying, come on, let's bring the principal in to see this. Come on, let's bring the vice principal in to see that. So in the end, I caved, and we did end up inviting them in, even just spur of the moment when something cool was happening in the classroom. But this all really paid off because those people then became our champions when they were speaking with parents. So part of it was a communication we were doing, but it was part of it that was coming out in parent coffees or other parent events that were going on around school. So the teachers didn't have to be the only ones sharing all the good things that we were doing. So when polled, 25% of parents said that they wanted more background information about why math is being taught this way. So how can you help? You can share some articles. You can share some videos or podcasts. You can share a few quotes from a book you've read about math and how they connect to your classroom. You can also talk about a conference you've attended, like this weekend, and what you're bringing back to the classroom. And by sharing these things, you're giving parents resources if they would like to know more. But you're also positioning yourself as someone who is very knowledgeable about the subject, and thus you will build trust with parents. So I wanted to linger a little bit on that word trust for a moment and tell you a story. This is a story about a K-8 school. And at this school, the middle school starts at fifth grade. So the school asked for my help because they learned that about 60% of the students in fifth grade were receiving tutoring outside of school. In addition, the fifth grade math teacher was receiving 20 to 30 emails a day from parents. It was overwhelming. I had been working with this school for a few years, so I knew that we'd put together a pretty solid math program. But what I didn't realize was how we had missed the mark on communicating that to parents. So, in an absence of information, many parents had come to believe that the math program was weak and they were worried for their children. They didn't yet have the trust that the school was doing a good job. So, we had to reconvene and plan and figure out what we were going to do. And the first thing we did was plan 3 parent meetings over the course of the year. These meetings would involve a mix of math experiences for the parents and information about changes in math education and the research we were using as the backbone of the program so that they could learn more about it. In the first meeting, and these were all held over Zoom, in the first meeting, we had about 100 parents. So that tells you how many people were really concerned about the math program. So this was around September. The second meeting we held around November, similar format, deeper with the topics. And in this meeting, we had about 60 parents. So that was actually a good thing. Sometimes having fewer people come is a bad thing, but we took it as a good sign that more people were feeling comfortable and that there was a little bit more trust. So the third meeting we held around February, and there were only about 20 people there. Now, 20 people does not sound like a good turnout for a meeting, but actually we felt really pleased with that because that meant that the trust had been built and that all the worries about the math program had really been calmed. So by the end of the year, the teacher was receiving only a few emails a day, and the number of students receiving outside tutoring had gone down dramatically. So over the course of that year, we built a lot of trust with the parent community. And the teacher was spending a lot less time dealing with confusion on students' parts about, oh, but my mom and dad taught me how to do it this way, or my tutor taught me how to do it this way, and now you're showing it to me differently. But the teacher was also able to spend less time answering emails and more time thinking about her lessons. So I've seen that trust continue through the years, even though this was a few years ago. We just had to build that baseline of trust that we could build upon each year. So next, let's talk about experiences. So how can you give parents an opportunity to experience the math you do in class every day with students? I noticed that someone mentioned family math nights in the chat. Those are a great thing, like an evening math event at your school. Also, a Zoom meeting over the lunch hour. I've also done a lot of evening Zooms with parents, which makes it easy sometimes for parents to attend because they don't have to get a babysitter. I've also done math mornings where parents come in and do math with their kids. And I love this for scheduling purposes because we can do it. Works especially well for classrooms of like kindergarten, first and second graders. Parents often are walking those kids in and they can stay for just like 30 minutes or something, do some math with us, and then they can go. And I can send a letter afterwards about what we've been up to. Or sometimes I've been able to have the kids go to a specialist and just gather the parents in the room so that we could talk a little bit about the math that they've seen. So there's lots of different formats this can take, but I think having parents come in and experience the math in the way that children are doing really gives them some insight into what we're doing. So I like to pick a lesson around 4th, 5th, or 6th grade level. I found that the math at those levels feels interesting enough for adults to dig into, but also approachable for most adults. So Candace is saying that she invites parents in on Friday afternoons to do problem solving with their kids or math games. That's so awesome. Another great idea to add to our collection. Thanks, Candace. So let's engage in a math task together that I've used with parents. You can see here a growing pattern. And a lot of parents have never heard of a growing pattern, though they are familiar with repeating patterns. So how do you see this pattern growing? Take a look at it. What would the next two steps be? Can you figure out the 10th step? How about the 100th step? I want to give you a couple minutes to think about it. So if you're ready for an extra challenge, can you write an expression to determine the amount of dots in any step? Go ahead and give it a shot. I'll share some answers in just a minute. All right, so I see a couple of people in the chat letting us know the expression they think we should use to figure this out. Let me show you some work that a few students have done. So this student saw the 5 at the bottom as an unchanging amount. See the green here, and it seems like a couple of people in our chat did as well. Then they saw the amount of dots in each arm was equal to the number of dots in the arrangement number. So in arrangement 1, we have 1 yellow dot on the left, but then we have to multiply by 2 because we also have a yellow dot on the right, or a dot circled in yellow on the right. In arrangement 2, we have 2 dots circled in yellow on the left, but then we also have 2 dots circled in yellow on the right. And arrangement 3, we have 3 on the left and then 3 on the right. So this student created the equation 2n plus 5, with n being the arrangement number and the total being the number of dots in each arrangement. And it sounds very similar to what a few people have thought about. Let me show you how a different student solved this same problem. A couple people are on to me. All right, so this student saw it differently. They saw the 3 dots in the middle, see the black portion here, as unchanging. And then they saw the arms as starting at the bottom. Each arm is the size of the arrangement number plus 1. So take a look at the red here. So in arrangement 1, on the left-hand side, we have 1 dot on the bottom, but then we have another dot on top of it. And then, of course, we have to multiply by 2 because we have the 2 arms. For arrangement 2, we have the 2 dots, but then we have another one on top of it. And then we have to multiply by 2 because we have the 2 arms. So this student came up with the equation 2 times the quantity n plus 1 plus the 3, with the 3 being the unchanging amount. So isn't it cool how we can have 2 different ways to see exactly the same image? And I expect there probably are a few more that we didn't discuss here. But tasks like these generate great discussion among parents, and they feel that math is more creative and visual than they experienced when they were in school. Parents are also often surprised to find out that there is more than one right answer, like in this task. So we have at least 2 different equations that will tell us the total number of dots. Did anyone come up with another one? Let's see. All right, so CAR MB is talking about looking for the patterns and expressing it in patterns. Yep. All right. Well, I'm just going to let that one sit for a little bit and you can think about it some more if you would like. So if you would like to have parents experience some math, uh, you can use this QR code to link to a page that I made. And at the bottom, you can download a list of tasks that I have used successfully with parents. I've used these in person and over Zoom, and they never fail to generate some interesting discussions. I'm sure you have some examples from your class that will work as well, but I thought perhaps you might like some that I have already tried with adults to see how those go over. So I wanted to come back to the idea of including administrators. Something we can do with administrators, but not always with parents, is to invite them in during class time. We can give them the opportunity to see the students at work and see the smiles on the students' faces, to feel the energy and hear the conversations. I love when all the kids are just so engaged in the work and the administrators can't even find the teacher in the room. It's just so great for them to see how engaged the students are. And then when those administrators talk with parents, they will have firsthand knowledge about what is happening in your room, that they can communicate with parents. And of course, they'll also have information about some of the cool teaching that you are doing. So I encourage you to include administrators as a piece of your educational triangle that you are going to work on. So next, let me come to the idea of sending work home. A question I hear often from parents is, what does my child do in math class on a daily basis? This is one of the most frequent questions I get, and most parents say they just really, truly have no idea. So how can we make your teaching visible? So one idea is to send some student work home. And from our poll, it sounded like a lot of people had already been doing that. You could write up math class in a Friday newsletter, or you could share photos of your classroom in action. All of these things share little snippets of what the classroom looks like and just give parents a visual, because it just looks really different from what it looked like when they were in school. Remember those things on our number line? The base 10 blocks, the rec and rec. What if you are using the building thinking classrooms model and everyone's standing up? Whoa, that just looks really different to parents. So you don't have to be showing extra special things, just some ideas of what the students have been working on. This is a collection of papers from a lot of different grades. So just some ideas of what's going on in class so that parents can kind of see what students have been up to and just sort of understand that it's not just pages of calculation, that there's different things happening. And Marie, yes, I will add the link to the chat a little bit later so that you can get to that page if you didn't already. You could also write a blog post or a class newsletter. So here I have a blog post about modeling division and multiplication using a tape diagram. Another idea is to include something in your class newsletter. So when I was teaching second grade, we read a story about Afghanistan. And the students learned that for $25, we could send 20 students in Afghanistan to school for a whole school year. So being 7 years old, the way they decided to raise money was to collect pennies. And we collected from all the parents in our community, but then we went out and collected from neighbors. And a lot of people aren't really using pennies these days, so it was a good one to collect. So we collected over 7,500 pennies, and the students counted them all out, rolled them up, and then we took them to the bank to cash them in. So that was something that I really wanted to share about in our newsletter. But of course, there's so many things to share, but that was one fun one that we shared. So just the idea here being that we want parents to just have some idea of what's happening in our classroom, however you get there. So what feels right? What feels easy? Do you already send some work home on Fridays? Just be sure to include some math. Or do you already write a weekly newsletter? Don't forget to discuss the math that you're doing. If you've roped in the administrators to come visit your classroom, perhaps there's like a monthly newsletter that they send out to the community, and they might include a little bit about the math that's happening in your grade. So just think about some ways that you can communicate with families about what's going on. So sometimes in class, we do special big projects. And how can we share these with families? So a great homework assignment I saw a teacher give was to have students go home and share their work with the adults at home. The students had to explain their math strategies and have the adults try the math using a strategy that wasn't the standard algorithm. The students became the teachers, and the parents gained a deeper appreciation for what was going on in class. A Google slideshow is also really easy to send home. So this works especially well if you're using a building thinking classrooms model. You could take some photos of some of the solutions and send those home. And it doesn't take too long to put it together into a slideshow. Here's a project I did with a kindergarten class, and I just love some of the answers the kids came up with. So I copied these and sent these home. So the question was, how many wheels would we have if each student brought a bicycle to school? I particularly like this answer because this 5-year-old already had the idea that we didn't need to draw the rest of the bicycle. The important part of the question was how many wheels. So they just drew the wheels and they put them in sets of 2 for each student in the class. Do you see the little stick people? And then they could count up the total number of wheels there. So organized for a 5-year-old. I loved that. Here's a different project. This is a geometry culmination project I did with a 4th and 5th grade class. So I read The Greedy Triangle. I'm sure a lot of you know that book. And then the students needed to write their own geometry picture book. They had to use at least 5 terms. They had to use 3 big ideas from the geometry we've been learning, and the books had to be mathematically sound. We then published the stories in a folding book format, and these books were really cool because they folded up into a square and then they unfolded, and they looked really neat on the wall when we shared them. This was a fraction book art project that I did with 4th graders. So we'd been studying fractions, and the students had to write a story about using fractions in a real life context and then create a book with their story. So you can see the round window there. And if you peek through it, you can see the scene on the inside, which depicts a piece of the story. These also open and close like accordions, and these were really fun to share with parents, and everyone was excited to see what the little picture was on the inside. So there was a lot of celebration around these books. Another idea is to have the walls of your classroom and your hallway speak. So here's a project I did with some 6th graders on the left. We studied Ellsworth Kelly's Colors for a Large Wall, and I've put the image of the official artwork down there so you can see it. Then the students used colored pieces of paper to create their own design, and after they had to calculate the number of each color, the fractional amount, as well as the decimal amount, and a percentage of that color in the whole work. These looked really cool out in the hallway because the students took them in a lot of different directions. To the right is a project I did with 1st graders. Crabs have 10 legs. Well, 2 of them are pinchers, but altogether there's 10. So they created crabs, and then we put them together in a growing pattern that gave us the opportunity to do lots of counting by tens. Both of these projects out in our hallway generated so much conversation from passersby, from families, and from students in other classes. So these were really fun to share with everyone. So next, I wanted to share a piece from a college math class. I'm pretty sure I don't have many college professors here today, but I wanted to share this because it shows there are so many fun ways to showcase math and share math with families. So this is for a piece of music. The student used a combination of different cosine waves at different amplitudes, multiples of the main frequency, and phrases, and then they added them together to make one note on the piano. They change which note plays by changing the main frequency. So on the left, you can see the equation that they used. And on the right, I've included a sample of the programming for this piece. These 10 lines that you see here are for one note. So there are over 900 lines of code just for this short piece I'm going to play for you. So I'm only including a small sample of the code here. But I wanted to share this. I hope you'll be able to hear it. Let me know in the chat if you can't, but you should be able to. So there were no instruments used to create that. It was all done by math. I actually had to take a look at the coding just to understand it. I would never be able to do that myself, but I didn't understand how that was math. But I think it's really cool, and I just thought you would get a kick out of that as well. So there's lots of different things we can celebrate that we're doing in math with and share with families so that they will enjoy them. So I'm going to shift gears here a little bit and talk about sharing good news. So an email from you to a parent builds a strong connection between home and school. And I love to capture something great a student has done, like creating an awesome musical piece, which I see a lot of you in the chat enjoy. And I love to send an email. The email can be short, like you can include a photo or just tell a story in a few sentences, and you don't have to send them to every parent. But each week, I try to send just a few emails. And one great way to frame your emails is around the math practices. So, did a student persevere in a task? Did they find an interesting connection? Did they do a great job listening to a classmate? This email can be about the way a student engages with the math. It doesn't have to be about how they got the correct answer. And these emails go a long way towards building a bridge between home and school and helping parents support the work that you are doing. So let's dig a little deeper into the math practices to give you some ideas. So as many of you know, the math practices are habits of mind that are the vehicles for teaching the math skills standards. They can be grouped into 4 big areas: habits of mind of a productive mathematical thinker, reasoning and explaining, modeling and using tools, and seeing structure and generalizing. Math practice 1 is one of my favorites. Make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. How many kids have we known who are really great calculators, but really fall apart when faced with a really challenging problem? I had one boy who would crumple papers and throw them at me and tell me that these challenging problems were impossible, that I had just given him impossible work to do. He was working on math practice 1. Math practice 3 is another favorite. Construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others. So can you explain your thinking, and can you really listen to the thinking of others? I love 1st and 2nd graders because when you ask them how they found the answer, they usually tell you, well, my brain told me, or I just knew it. So they're working on constructing a viable argument, really explaining to us how they got those answers. But also they're learning how to listen to other people's explanations. I did have a 4th grader tell me once that there was really no need to call on anyone else in the class because that student had all the right answers and he could just be the one to speak for everyone, and we should just only have him do all the speaking in the class. So he was definitely working on math practice 3 as well. But I like to think of these math practices in a different shape. And these are the same math practices you were just looking at, but I put them into a circle shape. because I like to think about them as creating a whole math student. A student who can do all of these things is a much stronger mathematician than a student who is just strong at calculation. I feel like when we have the math practices and a list, it almost looks like a checklist that we should just mark things off. But when we have them in a circle, it just feels like creating that well-rounded student. And those of you from early childhood will think about all that, whole child work that we've done about getting students to have social skills and being able to do physical things as well as academic things. So thanks, Beth. I'm really glad you like my design. Yeah, I think it really helps us to think about them. So when you're thinking about sending things to parents, think about calling on some of these math practices and not just, oh, your kid finished all their multiplication tables or whatever. In addition, these emails help parents start seeing their children differently. So most of you know Jill Buller is a professor of mathematics education at Stanford, and she's written a book called Limitless Mind. And in her book, she writes about learning key number 3. When we change our beliefs, our bodies and our brains physically change as well. So I think this is a really important thing to think about, because when parents start seeing their children as mathematicians, then children start believing they are mathematicians as well. We can tell them at school. Sometimes they get that from us, but it's really great when they hear that echoed at home as well. And I think these emails home shift how parents see their children and how children see themselves. And this will lead to success. I cannot tell you how many adults have come up to me and said, I'm just not a math person. So many people have said this to me. So let's change that for the next generation so that our students believe they are mathematicians and can learn and be successful with mathematics. And let's have that message coming from the classroom, but also from the parents. So I'd like to take a moment here to have you reflect and write down 1 or 2 ideas that you've gained from the conference this weekend that you want to share with parents in your class to help them better understand your teaching, the math, or perhaps something you want to share with one parent about their child. So think about those pieces of educate or to share good news with the family. Give you just a few minutes to think. So I see a few people are starting to share in the chat. Are there others who'd be willing to share? It could be something from this session, but it could be something from this weekend. I know we've been in a lot of different sessions this weekend. So what else have you been thinking about that you want to share? A lot of people are talking about taking more pictures and teaching parents more about the manipulatives. Yeah, Samantha's talking about a monthly newsletter to help keep parents current about what topics you're talking about. All right, sharing good news hit the mark with a number of people, and Melinda's thinking about inviting parents to the classroom. Yeah, Stacy, if you can do a Zoom with families, it's just so easy because they can be at home, you can be at home, and it's a great way to just connect and talk with them a little bit more. Oh, and then Sturgy is talking about maybe having students email their parents about what's going on. That would be fun too. And Dawn's got parent conferences coming up, so she's going to talk about the math practices. So Julie asked an interesting question. How do you get through to the parent who doesn't want to hear that their child is struggling? And I think that actually fits into the talk really well because sometimes we need to show them. And so if you can have parents come in and do math with their kid and their kid is struggling with the game that you're doing, or having parents having trouble making sense of the work that you're doing, once the parents have that experience themselves, and maybe it's a game you send home, maybe it's having them come into the classroom, but I really find that helping parents see things through a different lens is a way to help them come around to a different idea. I had one parent. Oh my goodness, this parent was tricky. She emailed me almost every single day talking about math. Oh, she wanted to talk about her kid and math so much. And so finally, I just started saying, come in. It was part of my school culture that I could invite her in. So I just said, just come in, just come spend some time with us. I see you're worried about this. Come see what that looks like in the classroom. I see you're worried about that. Come see what that looks like in the classroom. And she did. She came to class a lot. But she really came around and it really changed her thinking about how I was teaching, but also about how her kid was performing. And someone noted that so many times parents only get emails when it's sad news. Wouldn't it be amazing to get some of these great news emails? Yay, I love, there's so many great ideas here. Terrific. All right. So I wanted to come back to the idea of connecting parents to our classroom journey. Let's think again about those benefits that we'll get if we are able to connect parents. It will create better outcomes for students. We'll get an increase in student engagement. It will increase our school reputation. I told you that one little story about the school that we really changed around the trust with this parents in the school. And then an increase in parent support for the class. If you'd like to continue exploring this idea, I have a website. I started a website. This was my pandemic passion project. So I started a website called Elementary Math for Parents, where I just started explaining all the things that I was saying to parents over and over. So there's a lot of blog posts there about the strategies we're using. There's blog posts about the math practices. It's a growing collection that I will keep adding to, but there are a lot of resources there already. I also created 2 online courses. One is for parents of 4, 5, and 6-year-olds to give them some ideas about how to do math at home with their kids. And another is for parents of 2nd through 5th graders. And in that class, I talk about all the strategies for the 4 operations so that parents will feel really confident using those different strategies that are often really unfamiliar to them. In addition, I've been running an asynchronous book club for parents and for teachers on Instagram. Right now, we're studying Limitless Mind, which I mentioned in the talk, but feel free to join me there. And then finally, I want to put one of Joe Bowler's articles here because the issue parents most often ask me about is how come my child doesn't know their math facts quickly enough? So if you don't already know this article about fluency without fear, I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew about that because that helps a lot with that conversation. So thank you everyone for being here. I really hope you got some good ideas for ways to connect to parents and connect parents to your classroom. And I hope these connections will lead to richer experiences for your students and for you. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you so much, my friend. In the chat, do our wonderful, wonderful presenter the favor of saying what was your biggest takeaway and what are you going to try to put into practice based on what you've heard here? Also, remember, an awesome thing you can do is taking a screenshot or any of the screenshots that you may have taken, sharing them on social media so that you can share these ideas with other people in the math community. I want to thank you, Alison, for this great session. We so appreciate you. And friends, the summit is still alive and well. We have a few more sessions here that are going live. And then we also have some recorded sessions that will be released later today as well. So keeping in mind, remember, those replays will be available until later this evening. You can upgrade your ticket to a week-long pass where you can continue accessing those replays from the summit site, or you can upgrade your ticket to an Academy full access pass for $39. For $10 more, you have 2 full months to access not just the replays from this summit, but also all of the replays from our 4 previous summits, our 10 plus self-paced courses, and over 60 problem-based full units of study that you can dig into and download the teacher resources and guides to. So keeping in mind that your certificates of attendance will be coming your way tomorrow by end of day. If you have extended access, then you will be able to continue generating those certificates of attendance well beyond tomorrow and into the future as you consume more of those sessions. Friends, do us a huge favor, hit the follow or subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform for the Making Math Moments That Matter podcast. If you just type in Math Moments, it'll pop up, and do us a favor and leave a rating and review so we can reach a wider audience and do more events just like this one here today. So friends, thank you so much. And once again, a big thank you. Give a big wave to Alison if you have your camera on, and we will catch you in our next sessions. Take care, everybody.